We begin the day with much of Europe holding its breath until voters here in Germany make their decision. On Sunday, they go to the polls in an election that is expected to see a marked shift to the political right. And there is every reason for the economy to be the main issue in this election. Europe's largest economy is plagued by stubbornly high inflation. Its GDP has shrunk for the past 2 years in a row. But it is migration, uncontrolled migration, that has dominated the campaign. A series of Islamist-motivated attacks have contributed to a growing sense that the immigration policy of the past decade has been a mistake. Many inside Germany and even some outside of the country say voters have to correct this mistake before it's too late.
With just hours left before the election, the parties have been making their final pitch. Christian Democrat Friedrich Merz, the front-runner to be Germany's next Chancellor, addressed supporters on Thursday. The war in Ukraine, which played less of a role than expected during most of the campaign, has become central again after the US made overtures to Vladimir Putin. With Donald Trump's comments on Zelensky and Ukraine, it's become clearer what's happening here. The trench in the Atlantic is getting deeper. On Friday, Olaf Scholz addressed a large rally of his SPD party. He too said Germany should stand with Ukraine and was uncharacteristically direct as he spoke about the Trump administration. A favourite word in American politics is transactional. And if you translate that, it means I only think about myself and I only do what's useful to me. The Greens, under their lead candidate Robert Habeck, seem sure to be in the Bundestag, but not necessarily in power. Three smaller parties cannot be sure if they'll win any seats in the Bundestag. If they do, it could make forming a new government harder. The Left Party are currently riding high, especially with young voters. They reject tough measures on migration and military support for Ukraine, and they want a fairer economy. Another left-wing party leader, Sarah Wagenknecht, hammered home a programme that melds pacifism and left-wing economic policy with a hard line on immigration. The Free Democrats, members of Olaf Scholz's coalition until late last year, could potentially join a government again if they scrape into parliament. Meanwhile, all parties are wondering how much of the vote will go to the Alternative for Germany, AfD, and how loud will the far-right voice be in the coming 4 years. Pollsters say 1 in 5 voters have not yet made up their minds in what could be a very consequential, even historic election.
And joining me here at the big table is Sudha David-Wilp. She is Vice President of External Relations at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. She's a familiar face to our viewers, especially when it's election time here in Germany or in the United States. Good to see you, Sudha. You're a busy woman this week. I know you've been talking to reporters from all around the world. What have you noticed? What do they want to know about this election?
Great to see you, Brent. I think a lot of the reporters have been asking about the rise of the AfD, the fact that...
The Alternative for Germany
Party.
The
Alternative for Germany Party, a far-right party on the political spectrum that is going to come in second place, most likely, and is here to stay. This is a party that's not too old. It emerged a little over a decade ago, and it has been constant at the polls at 20%. And the second thing that people are also most interested in is German leadership, especially during a time of uncertainty in the transatlantic relationship.
The GDP, as I said at the beginning of the show, of Europe's largest economy, Germany, has shrunk for the past 2 years running. I mean, we're talking about major recession material here, but this campaign has shown us that it's not the economy, stupid, as we've heard many times from campaign advisors. How do you explain this?
Well, I do think that the two issues front and center on voters' minds are migration and economic anxiety. The cost of living is up, finding affordable housing, grocery prices are up. Very common themes that you hear among lots of Western democracies, things we've also heard in the last year's U.S. election.
That's right.
But those two issues are also very much interlinked with the geopolitical challenges that Germany is facing. I mean, the war against Ukraine by Russia accelerated the fact that Germany has some structural weaknesses. It was dependent on natural gas. It was dependent on exports to China and had outsourced its security to the U.S. And now it looks like Germany really is due for a lot of reform. But at the same time, migration has been very much in the headlines because of a spate of attacks here in Germany on the part of migrants.
And I want to pick up on this AfD, the Alternative for Germany party. As you said, it's expected to end up, the second strongest political party in Germany. Do you see this, the fact that it does have this strong support, is that a symbol of political failure by the established parties in this country?
So I think it's a mix of both. On the one hand, I think if you look at democracies, there has been a shift to the right. And so this is something that is also common here in the German political party system. And also because the migration debate has shifted all the parties, all the mainstream parties, also to the right. But also, it is due to the nature of German government over the last few cycles. Angela Merkel was in a grand coalition, meaning the center-left party, the SPD, and her party, the Conservatives, governed together for 3 out of the 4 times she was in office. And that left a vacuum on both sides, on the left and the right, for fringe parties to emerge. And the AfD has capitalized on the economic anxiety and the fear of migration.
There's been a lot of talk here about how the media is covering the campaign or how it's not covering the campaign. There have been accusations of biased journalists, biased moderators, TV anchors, people being planted in the audience, studio guests, for example, for election shows. How fair has the election coverage been, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, I do think that Germany has a healthy mix of media outlets. There's public broadcasting, there's private media, and also a really diverse array of media options for print, radio, broadcast. But of course, I do think that, maybe the German media is more left of center and has been accused of maybe being favored toward the Greens. A lot of journalists are more left of center, perhaps, here in Germany. But at the end of the day, I think journalists also are quite responsible and take pride in their work and do their best to deliver the news to German consumers. And the fact of the matter is, this time, the AfD was allotted time on many talk shows and took part in debates. So I think they also had equal airtime, just as the other mainstream parties have had.
Yeah, it's a tough job. Either way you look at it, to make sure that everyone feels like they're getting a fair shake. Sudha, I want you to stand by, stay here at the big table. We want to turn our attention to the other side of the Atlantic for a moment, and then we're going to come back to you and discuss the impact of Donald Trump on Germany's election. Stay right there. So a question for you. How long is your attention span? How much bandwidth does your mind have? Enough to withstand what is known as flooding the zone? Well, that is the term media analysts have given to what President Trump has done since his inauguration, bombarding Democrats and the media with an onslaught of initiatives, executive orders, and outrageous comments, a tsunami that overwhelms your ability to respond or react. On Tuesday, Trump signed an executive order that went right under the radar, it seems. There were no camera crews or photographers on hand when he picked up his pen. Just an announcement from the White House staff secretary. I want you to take a listen.
This executive order would establish important oversight functions in the Office of Management and Budget and its subsidiary office, OIRA, supervising independent agencies and many of their actions, and also reestablishes the longstanding norm that only the President or the Attorney General can speak for the United States when stating an opinion as to what the law is.
What Trump put his name to has many worried that a power grab could be underway in the U.S. With the stroke of his pen, The president claimed direct supervision of federal agencies that regulate stock markets, election spending, broadcasting, and more. There are dozens of them across the government set up by the U.S. Congress with a degree of independence to shield them from White House control. Well, is that independence now in jeopardy? Tuesday's executive order stated it shall be the policy of the executive branch to ensure presidential supervision and control of the entire executive branch. This is not the first time that Trump has tested the boundaries of presidential power. So far, he has pushed through massive changes to the U.S. government. He's fired a lot of people. Experts say that he is on some shaky constitutional grounds.
The fact that the president does not make it legal. In our system of government, the fact that any government official does something does not make what they do legal. The Constitution is what makes it legal.
But the U.S. president says everything he is doing is completely above board. In a social media post that appeared to echo the words of the French dictator Napoleon Bonaparte, Trump said, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." All right, let that one sink in. My next guest is Richard Painter. He's a law professor. He also served as the chief ethics lawyer for President George W. Bush. Professor Painter, it's good to have you back on the program. Let me ask you, the president claims that he who saves his country does not violate any law. If you were Donald Trump's chief ethics lawyer, what would you be telling him right now?
I'd be telling the president that his oath is to uphold the law, to the Constitution of the United States, not to some abstract concept of saving his country. The president of the United States has power over the executive branch pursuant to the Constitution in Article 2, but has an obligation to faithfully execute the laws of the United States, and that includes the Constitution and the statutes passed by Congress. And that's the president's obligation, and he must adhere to it.
Mr. Painter, would you say that Donald Trump is pushing the limits of his power as president, or has he already overstepped those limits?
I believe in a number of respects he has overstepped those limits. The Department of Justice must have some degree of independence from the White House when it comes to prosecutorial decisions. We can't have the Justice Department that will only prosecute Democrats when a Republican is in the White House and only prosecute Republicans when a Democrat is in the White House. That's not the point, and we don't let people off from bribery charges simply because they do political favors for the president, as has the mayor of New York. So it's very important to have an independent Justice Department. That doesn't mean that the president doesn't appoint the Attorney General. And yes, the Attorney General can work with the other lawyers in the Justice Department to decide which interpretations of the law the Justice Department wants to present before the courts. Of course, only the courts decide what the law is, and the President of the United States is duty-bound to follow the orders of the Supreme Court of the United States and the other courts. And I have heard arguments made by crazy people on the extreme left as well as the extreme right that somehow the President of the United States can ignore the orders of the court. And that's a very, very dangerous precedent.
The executive order that we were talking about earlier in the program, President Reagan once considered requiring the same sort of review for these independent agencies, but he ended up deciding against it. Donald Trump also considered it during his first term. Why do you think we're seeing it now?
The issue with the independent agencies is that some agencies, such as the Federal Trade Commission, the Securities Exchange Commission, Federal Election Commission, Federal Communications Commission, were set up by Congress to be independent in the sense that they would have 5 commissioners, usually 3 of the president's political party, 2 of the other political party, and that the commissioners could not be removed by the president. President Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, tried removing a commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission back in 1936. And in the case Humphrey's Executor versus Federal Trade Commission, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. Congress set this agency up to be independent. The Trump administration wants to overturn that precedent, which would mean that all of these agencies, including, as I say, the Federal Election Commission, which polices elections in this country, would be under the control of the president himself. And I think that's a very, very dangerous precedent if the Supreme Court allows him to go down that road.
There has been a lot of criticism of Elon Musk and the role that he has in this administration. I want you to listen to Stephen Miller. He's the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. He was speaking to the White House press corps, and he gave them what he called a civics lesson. And take a listen to what he said. I'd like to get your reaction.
And the Constitution, Article 2, has a clause known as the vesting clause, and it says the executive power shall be vested in a president, singular. The whole will of democracy is imbued into the elected president. That president then appoints staff to then impose that democratic will onto the government. The threat to democracy, indeed the existential threat to democracy, is the unelected bureaucracy of lifetime tenured civil servants who believe they answer to no one, who believe they can do whatever they want without consequence, who believe they can set their own agenda no matter what Americans vote for.
So, Professor Painter, he's saying there that civil servants are a threat to the plan that the Founding Fathers put out in the Constitution. Is that an accurate read of civics?
The Constitution and the vesting clause vests the power over the executive branch in the president, who is bound to faithfully execute the laws of the United States. There's nothing in the Constitution about the will of the people. I don't know where all the will of the people talk comes from, and that somehow the executive is connected to the will of the people. The only legal philosopher I know has written on that is Carl Schmitt in the 1920s, and that was the rhetoric used by the Nazi Party. That somehow the will of the people is reflected in one man. That's just absolutely not the case. That's not the vision of the founders of the United States or of any other democracy. The president does have control over the executive branch pursuant to the vesting clause. Absolutely, but not because he expresses the will of the people in some metaphorical sense, but because he was duly elected under the Constitution, and he is bound by the Constitution and the laws of the United States under the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution. And the civil service, most of the civil service is protected from being removed under the civil service laws. The political appointees can be replaced by the president, as he has done, but he cannot fire at will these civil service employees simply because of their political views or other irrelevant matters to their performance. Having a professional civil service is absolutely critical to a functioning democracy in a country the size of the United States.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And we have yet to see what happens when you fire those civil servants en masse, as is the case right now. I want to pull up a picture I want to show our viewers. I don't know if you have seen this. It's an image, though, that Donald Trump posted on his social media platform, Truth Social. It's a picture of Donald Trump wearing a crown on a magazine cover that looks like the cover of Time magazine. And, you know, they say a picture tells 1,000 words. What does that picture tell you, Professor Painter? Is Donald Trump, is he having a Julius Caesar moment?
Well, in my book, American Nero, I compared him more to the Emperor Nero back in 2020. But the United States Constitution does not contemplate a king. Back in the 1770s, we had an American Revolution because we did not want a king. It is very clear that the founders of this country wanted to have a representative democracy where the Congress is the preeminent power. And indeed, under the Articles of Confederation, we only had a Congress, and then we adopted the Constitution 10 years later to have a president who could execute the laws of the United States. But the president does not make the laws. Congress passes laws. The laws are interpreted by the courts. And once again, the president is bound by the Constitution, and the laws must obey an order of the courts, particularly the Supreme Court of the United States. And I will emphasize once again that extremists of the far left and the far right have been arguing for quite some time that the President of the United States somehow has the power to ignore a court order. And that is a very, very dangerous trend.
Professor Richard Painter, the former chief ethics lawyer for U.S. President George W. Bush. Professor Painter, as always, we appreciate your time and we appreciate you sharing your valuable insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, back in the studio now at the big table with me is Sudha David-Wilp. She's the Vice President of External Relations at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. She was sitting here listening to what Professor Painter was saying, and we want to take the U.S., we want to bring it down to this German election. The reach of the U.S. president is a part of this German election. Last week, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, he was at the Munich Security Conference, and he accused, maybe indirectly accused, the German political elite of censoring political opinions, mainly those of the Alternative for Germany party, the second largest party in the country right now. We also know that the vice president met with the AfD's Chancellor candidate, Alice Weidel. Has this White House attempted to engineer the outcome of this German election?
Well, I don't know if they've tried to engineer the outcome, but they've certainly made their choice very clear, and not just the speech from Vice President J.D. Vance, which created quite a stir at Munich. I was at the MSC, and I think most people were bracing for some sort of berating when it comes to sort of defense spending or doing more in Europe. Germany should be stepping up. But this was quite, a shock. And the fact of the matter is, it's not just J.D. Vance. It was also weeks before that, Elon Musk, that has openly also endorsed the AfD. But I'm not sure it's really making a difference because we've not really seen a lot of movement. The AfD is very strong at 20%, but it's not like there has been a surge of more support after these endorsements. I think voters here in Germany are drawn to them because they want a hard line on migration and because they're anxious of the economic model that Germany is, not ready for the future, and also worries about the Russian invasion of Ukraine and Germany getting dragged into some sort of war.
You know, you and I, we have followed German and American politics and elections for a long time now. We're part of this transatlantic community. Does it face an existential threat? I mean, how important will the results of this election be for the future of the transatlantic world?
Well, things are still very much in flux, Brent. It is definitely a precarious moment because it seems like the U.S. is willing to play a bit more hardball than usual with Germany and with Europe on reaching certain demands and using security as a threat against the Europeans, which, to me, I still think there's a lot of overlap of interests between the United States and Europe, whether it means confronting China together, whether it means developing innovative solutions for the next pandemic, like BioNTech, for example, a perfect example of, scale with the U.S. company Pfizer and innovation from German labs. So I do think there's still a lot of room for cooperation, also with regard to the Middle East. But there needs to be more pragmatism. And of course, Germany needs to play more of a leadership role in Europe. Many presidents have asked Germany to do that in the past, and I think Germany's ready to do it. But it would be better to do it, of course, in coordination with the United States.
Well, we will see who will be leading that possible coordination after this coming Sunday. Sudha David-Wilp. Sudha, always good to have you here. We appreciate your time and your insights. Come back again. Thank you.
Thank you.